Hey, welcome to week 9 of my journey through spring semester to work on a graduate degree. Glad you're here. This was a fun week to study and learn a lot of really kind of quirky and interesting things that we got to study and look at this week. It was really pretty fun. So to begin, I want to talk about the Aunt Jemima stuff to begin with. This is my historical research class, learning how to be good historical researchers. The 3000 class. Um, so this came up because one of the assignments we have this week is to read 2 research papers about Aunt Jemima, the brand, and then do a comparative analysis report of both of these 2 papers together. So I have to write a 3-page research paper based on these 2 research papers. And these research papers are about 27 pages, 27 to 30 pages each. So I got to read 60 pages of research and then do a 3-page report on it. So that's historical research to an extent. Some of the assignments we have to do. So it was really fun to get into because this week, what we've been talking about in that class is dealing with competing narratives. Sometimes when you get into history and historical research, you realize there's more than one way to view what happened or the results of what happened or different perspectives to take of what was going on at that time. And this is important to understand. History rarely is completely black or white. It's one way and that's it. Okay, you got to be careful in history, just like in modern world. We can look at modern stuff today, and see multiple perspectives of those things. Like even a football game. You could look at a football game and we could talk about winners and losers. We could talk about individual teams, their overall trends and attitudes and how that influenced the game. We could talk about the individual efforts of players and how that influenced the game. Was there a player that won the game for their team or lost the game for their team? Was it a team-wide win or lose? Was there other circumstantial or situations or things going on that influenced it? We could study the crowd and the crowd's perspective of the game. We could talk about the game in relation to marketing. We could talk about the game in relation to lots of different factors. So we can take one game and we can look at that game from a dozen different perspectives. Some of them might agree in some ways with each other. Some of them will disagree with each other. It's just looking at those perspectives, okay? So in history, this is an important thing for us to look at is that sometimes competing narratives emerge of things that happen in history. So to give you an idea of this, the Aunt Jemima stuff was interesting. So one of the papers is about Aunt Jemima as a symbol of slavery and black racism in America. The other paper was actually a symbol of how Aunt Jemima represented blacks in Canada, in fact. So a little bit different perspective. To give you some background on Aunt Jemima came around. That brand is a brand of syrup. It's a brand of pancake mix. That's mainly where it came from, was a pancake mix. There was 2 gentlemen back in the late 1800s that created a pancake mix that they thought was really good, really helpful, just flavors, and it rose well, and they got a good combination of flours and different things together to make it a really good recipe. And they wanted to advertise it, and they went to a show. They had like vaudeville shows back then in the late 1800s. And this one show was a kind of a minstrel show, so there was some singing and dancing and things going on. And there were 2 women on stage that wore what's called blackface. So this is 2 white women that painted their faces and hands in black and acted as if they were a black woman in this song and dance type show. A lot of these, when you go back and look up these minstrel shows, you find that they were making fun of race, making fun of races or gender stereotypes or different things like that. Sometimes that was common comedy, common entertainment back then, was kind of making fun of other people. So anyways, they were there, and there was a there was a woman who had blackface on, and she was Aunt Jemima. And that's when they got this idea of, why don't we sell our pancake mix as if it is from this just nice, happy black woman who's working on a plantation for a guy who's a former colonel in the army, and she just loves making her pancakes, and everybody can't wait to come over to Colonel Higby's house to try Aunt Jemima's famous pancakes, buckwheat pancakes. And so that's the story they came up with. They created this backstory of Aunt Jemima, why she's there. She's black. She's a servant, basically a slave to Colonel Higby, and she is his cook. And she has this secret recipe that just makes the most wonderful pancakes you've ever had in your life. And Colonel Higby loves inviting people over to have her cook for them because everybody loves them and they're just amazing. So Aunt Jemima became a woman who's very black, a black woman, wore a checkered headband, and was pretty heavy set. So kind of the symbol of an abundant, jovial, happy black woman who just loved serving white people. Was kind of how it turned out. And then it evolved. They actually got women. They went to like World's Fairs and other conferences. They actually found an actress, kind of a black woman, who would fit the part of Aunt Jemima, and they dressed her up and they had her cook pancakes and serve pancakes at these conferences and fairs for a while, traveling around and doing stuff to kind of personify the Aunt Jemima. So they built a persona of what Aunt Jemima was like, and they made it so realistic that it was just amazing what they did. They really, Aunt Jemima is not just a story of ideas of slavery and other things in the South, but also her persona came about during a time when marketing and advertising were exploding. Like the ability to do new types of advertising and marketing things were starting to grow. New ways of reaching audiences and doing things was grow. And these two men that co-founded the Aunt Jemima brand, the mill basically that was producing this flour and the pancake mix, they capitalized on some amazing trends in marketing and did a really good job. The company went through a few sales over the years to other owners over time, but Aunt Jemima survived. In fact, there were 3 women who played Aunt Jemima, and Nancy Green was the first, and she played her for several years. Then she later actually was in a car accident. She was a pedestrian auto accident basically and was killed. And then had to bring in another woman to do it. She did it for a long time and then retired. Another woman came in to do it for a little while too. So the Aunt Jemima brand has lasted a long time. Now, I know it went away a few years ago, but it sounds like it actually might be coming back. Aunt Jemima brand might be coming back into the branding might be coming back basically, which would be interesting. So, it's just an interesting way to look at this brand and how it turned out and how it evolved and adjusted over time. So it was fun up in Canada, so the gist of it basically here in America, as we got through the Depression, as we got through the World War I and all those hard times and started to get into some better times, technology was starting to advance. Even through World War II, technology was advancing, so white women's roles were changing considerably. White women historically were seen as in the home and just taking care of the family, cleaning up, doing all those things, and then she would have servants. At least the Southern women would have servants that would help them out. Having a servant wasn't quite as popular in the northern part of the United States because of abolition. They didn't do that as much. But they still had sometimes servants helping them out or people that were paid servants to help with the families, especially in more wealthy areas. As we get into the 1950s, though, technology changes. We start getting washing machines and we start getting lots of other, dishwashers and other types of equipment that make living easier for a woman. They don't need technology replaced the servant because a housewife could now take care of more tasks because these machines would help her in those tasks. So she didn't need to hire other servants to help out. So the servants lost their jobs at that time. Quite a few of them did. as this changed, of course, during the war, especially World War II, a lot of women went to the factories to take up the jobs that the men were vacating because they were going into the war effort. So women started to work more, which meant women were making their own money. They were doing more things, so more. And when the men came back, they're like, okay, women go back to the house. And they're like, nope, we're not. We want to keep doing this. We like this freedom. We like the money we're making. We like these opportunities. So it started to shift perspectives of women's roles and things as well. So at this same time, one of the technological advances, I say that with quotes around it, that was happening also was packaged food. And this is where Aunt Jemima really flourished, because you can't hire an Aunt Jemima to come cook at your house. That wasn't socially as popular or good to do anymore, and economically, it would have been expensive to hire old Southern antebellum black woman to come cook for you. So what they did is they posed that it's all done. You just have to add water to this, and it'll make the world's best pancakes. And so this is Aunt Jemima's secret recipe in your home. So in a way, by using Aunt Jemima's pancake mix, it was as if you had a servant in your home. I don't have to really do much, but just put some water in it, mix it up, and then flip the pancakes over, and I'm done. And so no hassle, no mess. So packaged goods started to come out where they were, instead of buying things in more raw elements and then having to combine them and cook them at home, they pre-packaged them and got them to the store. That meant new marketing because the boxes could now be advertised on and things could be put on the boxes to attract people's attention. And it started this trend of faster foods, instant foods, quick and easy. Just open the box, it's ready to go for you. So cereal went that way with General Mills. Soups went that way. That's where Campbell's soup started to come around. Lots of the things happened as well to make it faster and easier, because women had less time. They had families, but they also had careers. They had other things to do. And so food went from actually being something that you take the time to prepare and cook and chop vegetables and do things, to you open up a can, you pop open a box, and you warm it up. So which has evolved with microwave foods, the TV dinners and things that used to have in the 80s and 90s, and fast food restaurants and other restaurants. And now we have delivery of food and all kinds of other stuff today that have changed that around. So you can see some interesting trends all the way through. In Canada, slavery was different. Most of the servitude in Canada was not blacks. It was poor whites from Europe. So people from the British Isles, so Ireland, Scotland, other places that were poor, immigrating to Canada, looking for work. And so they started doing domestic labor for other whites, basically. So poor whites became the servants of the wealthier whites, so they could get money coming in, do things to help them out, especially women. This was common. If they didn't have a husband, then obviously becoming a servant for another family was a great way to be connected with the family and to have an income of your own. And so that's what they did. A majority of blacks that were in Canada were from the Caribbean, not Africa. Canada started importing blacks from the Caribbean for a while for slavery, servitude type ideas, but it was different. So when they sold Aunt Jemima in Canada, they didn't make it a Canadian slavery situation. Like in America, Aunt Jemima was a slave in the antebellum South, in the southern United States. In Canada, they used it as a way to tap into American antebellum South, American slavery. It wasn't Canadian slavery, it was American slavery. But these are world famous pancakes from this world famous woman in the antebellum South, and now you can get them up here, and they were manufactured up here. In fact, this was when oh man, I just forgot the name of the company. I can see their logo. It's the Quaker Oats. That's right, Quaker Oats. When Quaker Oats bought the Aunt Jemima brand, they ended up building a manufacturing plant in, I believe it was Toronto, and they started to manufacture Aunt Jemima pancake mix in Toronto. And then Quaker Oats ended up moving a lot of their headquarters up there because it was the industry was amazing. It was flourishing and growing really well. So just interesting how they had to sell it in a different way, but it was this brand of come try Southern cooking, more than it was like the slavery idea. And that changed. Aunt Jemima slimmed up over the years as body consciousness became more of a thing to think about. Slavery went away. She became more of just the helper. So she's the black woman in the background helping the white woman to get all of her stuff done so the white woman can enjoy her life better. That's kind of how it went. So just interesting, these ideas. Last week we had an assignment where we talked about the Industrial Revolution. We read 6 articles about the Industrial Revolution. Half of the articles were very pro-Industrial Revolution. The other half of the articles were not as favorable about the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is a time in the early 20th century in America, late 19th century, early 20th century, that we saw in America a huge uptick in the ability to do manufacturing. So manufacturing started to change at this time from going away from artisanship, so craftsmen, men who were really skilled at what they did. And it started to shift to more mass manufacturing. So they took what these craftsmen were doing, they broke them down into smaller tasks, and then instead of retaining the craftsmen to do them, they hired a bunch of women and children who were paid at lower wages to do all these series of small, low-skilled tasks that all add up to the finished product, which is the same as what this craftsman would do. So they lowered their wages, the wage expenses, they were able to increase production at the same time because they could employ many more people to get the job done. So it increased profitability for the manufacturers, the owners of the businesses. Then they switched to steam engines. Steam engines could come in, and a steam engine could run mechanical machinery down an assembly line that could crank out faster and more accurate, more products in less time, basically, and be just as accurate, if not more accurate. You didn't have people taking sick time. You didn't have to worry about injuries or other problems. You just had to hire a minimal amount of people to run the machines and make sure it was working, and that was it. So that really changed the economy of scale for manufacturing in America, and which was good for profitability and for the ability to make a lot of product in a short period of time. So costs came down. Cost of goods started to drop because they could make it so much faster and cheaper. So that helped people. But on the other side of that too, people were losing jobs because of the manufacturing technological improvements. So they didn't need as many people to work. And so now people had to find other work. So unemployment issues were happening. The living conditions of a lot of people in the eastern United States at this time was bad. They basically had lots of people living in tight quarters, like big apartment buildings. They were all close together. So disease would just run rampant through these apartment complexes. And they didn't have good sewer systems and things. One of the studies that one of the reports we read was a study done by a man who was commissioned to do this report to figure out how do we improve health conditions in these areas, these communities. And he realized it's managing our water. We need to get clean water into the people, and we need to get refuse and waste and things out efficiently. So we need to put indoor plumbing in and sewer lines and other things that'll make it better. So these men who are working in the factories were working many, 14, 15-hour days, sometimes longer than that, always tired, always worn out, getting sick, their immune system's compromised, they're dying, which is now causing women and children to be without a father and without an income, and so increased homelessness, dissolution of families, all kinds of problems. And they're like, look, we need to change this. We need to improve our water management system. So clean water, we need to guarantee clean water is getting to the people, and we need to guarantee that the wastewater, like from bathrooms and other things, is getting out of there in a way that they're not mixing and they're not causing the spread of disease. So that was their recommendation. So the Industrial Revolution caused problems because living conditions were bad, people weren't getting paid well, but because of the problems from the Industrial Revolution, a lot of employment law today, like child labor laws, how long can you work, you need to get breaks to your employees, those kinds of things. A lot of employment law we take for granted today originates from the problems of the Industrial Revolution. So it was a hard time. There was good points and bad points of the Industrial Revolution. And we have to realize when studying history, we need to take the time to understand that what we're looking at is one perspective of history. I know in today's world there's a group of people that talk a lot about the how slavery built America up. And honestly, I think there is a valid argument in there that slavery contributed tremendously to the economic growth of America. However, it doesn't mean slavery is the only thing that caused America to be great. So even like Christopher Columbus, some people will look at things like Christopher Columbus and say, oh, he was a great person because he discovered all, the Americas and things. Others say he's a bad person because he owned slaves and he contributed to these problems of conquistadors coming over and killing lots of people over here. Those are some of the other challenges that happened. But he did good stuff and he did bad stuff. Those are just different perspectives. It doesn't mean we should take one perspective and disown the rest. Look at multiple perspectives to gain a better understanding of what really is there. That's the problem. The problem isn't looking at other perspectives. The problem is prioritizing one perspective over another until you understand the truth of those matters. Okay, so yes, Civil War Confederate generals, we have a lot of statues, or used to have a lot of statues to those kinds of people. Should we honor them? Maybe there's some things in their life we should honor and we should look at. Maybe there's things that did they make bad choices? Yes, they did. Okay, we celebrate George Washington as the founding president of America and a huge important person in developing America as a general during the Revolutionary War and other things. Did he have slaves? Yeah. Was that weird for the time he grew up in? No. So we have to be careful reinterpreting the past through a modern lens. We can look at the past through a modern lens, but if we make that if we establish that that's the way to always look at history, then history will always be wrong. Always remember, when you're studying history, you're studying a foreign country. It'll be as if you're studying a foreign country because it'll be different than what you're used to, and that's okay. It's just a look at perspectives, look at other ideas. There's some truth, there's some not truth in there. Just take it as it is. It doesn't need to be, one narrative doesn't need to be the full truth. So sometimes historians deal with competing narratives, and we have to evaluate both of those narratives and through our research and through our writing, get those narratives to talk to each other and to compare and contrast and those things. And so sometimes that's part of a historian's job, basically. Well, anyways, okay, let's jump on to some of my other classes. In my senior seminar, the 4990 class on Genesis, we talked about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. And I got a lot more about Hagar I'm going to talk about next week as well, because that's my research project for that class, is studying the story of Hagar. So let's look at this story. We have this man, Abraham. He grows up in an area called Ur, which is probably near the border of Iraq and Iran, towards the southern part of Iraq and Iran, right near that border area. Excuse me, my nose is itching. That's where he was born, in that area. It actually wasn't a desert. It was more of a fertile area back then. Not too bad of a place to live. But he lived in this time where idolatry, or like the worship of many gods, was so common. In fact, his dad's business, their whole family living, was based on his dad as a craftsman carving out of wood and stone idols. He was putting together idols of the gods, and then he would sell them. People would come by and go, hey, I need help with my crops. What, do you have a god for crops? Oh yeah, that's this guy right here. It's 1995. Okay, great, I'll take him, thank you. And so people were just worshiping, using these idols to say, oh, okay, I bought the idol. Now this is representing my God, or a God I want to have on my side. So now hopefully by honoring his idol, I will get the God on my side. And Abraham's like, is this really how this works? Is God stone and wood and you have to buy him to get him to help you? I mean, in his mind, it didn't make any sense. So in fact, he had an experience that he learned of, where one of the idols fell over in their home, in the shop, basically. And it fell over, and his dad's like, hey, Abraham, you go pick that idol back up. And he's like, he went in there and looked at it and said, hey, idol, if you are a god, if you can control the elements, if you can cause crops to grow or to die or curse other people or things, why can't you pick yourself up? So pick yourself up. And then he left. Came back the next day, the idol still on his face. And he went, this is not an idol. This is just a piece of stone. This idol really can't do anything. So he started to tell everybody, hey guys, don't buy the idols. This is baloney. This isn't real God stuff. This is fake stuff. And his dad's like, oh man, my son's bad for business. I got to kill him. So he tries to oust Abraham. Abraham's son, or not son, but brother dies in a house fire instead. They were going to lock Abraham in the house and burn the house down with him in it. And instead of him, his brother goes into the house and a lightning bolt comes down and burns the house down with him in it. So his brother dies instead of Abraham. So Abraham's life starts off pretty rocky. He has got a dad that wants to kill him. So Abraham eventually leaves and gets out of there. He meets Sarai, which Sarai means princess. That's the origination of the term Sarah, is princess. So he meets Sarai. Her name was turned to Sarah later on. They get married and are living together and things, and being a family. She probably came from being called a princess. She probably came from a more royal or well-to-do family, and so they're probably like, who's this Abraham dude? Why is he this wandering guy? He's not worth anything. He's kind of weird, an outcast. But anyways, they get married, do their stuff, and they go over. God says, hey, you need to go to the valley of this other place over here, the land of Canaan. Directs them to the land of Canaan, says, I'll give you this area for your people because you've been so good and wanting to seek me out in prayer and really know who I am. And so he says, you're going to get Canaan, but not yet. And then a big famine happens. They decide to go to Egypt because there's abundance in Egypt. And while in Egypt, Abraham runs into a problem. Okay, he's got this really amazing wife. Some apocryphal writings say that she was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman, which is like a diamond in the rough in Middle East. So she had exceptional beauty, Sarah did. And so the problem is you go to Egypt, the Pharaoh's going to be like, man, your woman is smoking hot. Let's just kill the husband and I'll take the woman and put her into my harem, basically. And Abraham's like, well, but God's given me these promises and these blessings of great stuff that's going to happen. So I can't die. So I'll tell you what, Sarah, if anybody asks, you're my sister. Okay. Now understand there's something important that comes out in this story that's important for us to think about. In the Old Testament, there really wasn't a concept that like we have today of marriage. So when we think of marriage, we think a husband and a wife coming together, leaving their families, becoming one flesh type idea. From the New Testament, it talks about that. Having equality between men and women, husband and wife, working together against the world to get things done. That's not what happened in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, women were property. So when you think of marriage in the Old Testament, it's not, the better term to use is woman's status. Okay, when a woman is born, her status is she is the daughter of a man. She's the property of her father. And she maintains that status, whatever status the family has. If the family's poor, she's a poor woman, which means she'll be a slave or a servant. If they're rich, then she will be a rich woman. But she's still the property of her dad. Dad is the patriarch. She's his property. So if you remember in some of the stories, and even talks about it in the Law of Moses, if a woman is raped, you owe the dad money because you defaced his property. There's no talk, unfortunately, of taking care of the woman who is raped, unfortunately. But that was a scenario. So when Abraham and Sarah marry, Abraham basically is buying Sarah from her dad. And now Sarah becomes Abraham's property. Now Abraham, because they went to Egypt, Abraham had some wealth. He got a lot more wealth in Egypt. So the problem for Pharaoh, from Pharaoh's perspective of this, is Sarah is Abraham's property. So if he wants Sarah, then Abraham's got to go. And if I can get Abraham some accidental death for Abraham, he gets out of the way. Oh, look, you're a woman without a husband. You need a husband. You need a man to own you. Come be part of mine. And that's what Pharaoh's thinking. So Abraham knew this was going to happen. So he's like, Sarah, if anybody asks, you're my sister. Now that changes the dynamic because the oldest son would run the family. If the dad dies, the oldest son takes over. Between the mom and the oldest son, they kind of hold a co-opportunity, co-rulership in the family, but the son still has executive decisions over things because he's a man and not a woman, kind of idea. That's how the Old Testament times was, or were back then. So as a sister, Abraham is the steward of Sarah. He doesn't own her, but she can't do much without a man anyways, and so he's the man that helps her to travel and to do things. But that means she's also available to be bought. So they go into Egypt. Pharaoh goes, man, she's hot. I want her. And they find out, oh, this is Abraham's sister. Well, let's give Abraham a ton of wealth. They give Abraham a ton of wealth. She becomes part of the harem. Pharaoh decides to go sleep with Sarah, and a curse comes on the people. Lots of problems start happening. Probably some kind of a weird STD or something happened. I don't know, but a plague. It's interesting, kind of a foreshadowing of how Pharaoh and the descendants of Pharaoh and the descendants of Abraham play this out in Moses' day, hundreds of years later. So there's a plague, and Pharaoh's like, what the heck just happened? And he goes to Sarah and is like, what's going on? And Sarah's like, actually, I'm not Abraham's sister, I'm his wife. And he's like, what? What are you guys thinking? Lying to me about this. And so he gets mad at Abraham. Why did you lie to me? This is terrible. Get out of my nation. And he kicks him out. But he didn't take back his stuff he gave Abraham. So Abraham ends up getting wealthy, and he probably had stuff before, but now he's got a lot more stuff. And he and Sarah leave Egypt and move on. During this time, Sarah picks up a servant, an Egyptian woman, probably a black Egyptian woman, that would be her maidservant. Her name is Hagar. So now they're out living on their own, doing their thing. They go up. Lot now comes into the story as well. So Lot shows up. Okay, this is Abraham's nephew. They go up into the Jordan Valley area, and this area now is just a complete desert. Like almost nothing lives there. It's so rare to find stuff alive. It's just so barren and rocky and sandy and bad. Back then, it was extremely fertile. Like just crops grew everywhere, plants growing places, probably some trees here and there. Just an amazing place. So Abraham and Lot get together and they go settle up that way. And they've got a lot of sheep, and they can't live near each other because their sheep herders run into conflict of watching each other's sheep. So Abraham says, okay, Lot, we need to kind of separate things up here. Do you want to go down in the valley and live, or do you want to stay up here on the hillsides and live? And Lot says, I want to go down in the valley where the cities are and live. That's where Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities were. And so there was a lot more commerce, a lot more, so in a way, think about this. Abraham, to give you kind of a more modern analogy, Abraham would have been asking Lot, do you want to live near Las Vegas, or do you want to live in the middle of Nebraska? That was the choice. Kind of a way of thinking about it in a modern way, okay? And Lot's like, I want to go to Vegas. The economic prosperity, the opportunities are so much greater down there. So he goes to Vegas. So Abraham's like, all right, I'll move to Nebraska. So he stays up in the hills, lives his life, a very hospitable guy, grows a garden, and actually has a gate, has like a fence around his property, has gates so to keep the animals out, but anybody human was welcome to come in and use his garden and things. He was a very hospitable guy. Lot, I think, was hospitable, but it was different in Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's where that story comes in. If you want to learn more about that, in fact, my other videos about that time in Genesis, go watch it. Sodom, the problems of Sodom was not just morality. It was a severe lack of hospitality and fakeness that they had that's astounding. Go look at my other videos in around Genesis 17, 18, 19, those kinds of chapters, and you can get more details on that. So anyways, then we have the Sodom and Gomorrah story where, of course, Lot gets caught in a war among some of these kings down there, and Abraham has to go save him. And then Sodom and Gomorrah stuff happens, and then Lot leaves. And then we run into another challenge, okay? So Lot leaves. His wife looks back, gets turned into a pillar of salt, which most scholars today believe is more um, not literal, but more figurative. It's more a literary understanding of why some of the situations are the way they are out there. If you go to that area, there are pillars, like just big things of salt that kind of stand by themselves. And so they think maybe they think as somebody was looking at that area after all the destruction, that this pillar of salt might have represented the destruction of Lot's wife. So I think it was more not literal. That part of the story is probably not literal, but more um, a function of trying to explain the geography of the time of that area, basically, of why some things were there. But it's interesting that how that story unfolds. Again, watch my videos if you want to see how Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed. A lot of archaeologists today believe it was an asteroid, actually, that came down and killed them, and that's in my other Genesis videos you can watch on my channel. But anyways, what happened was Lot finds himself alone with his two daughters. He has two daughters, and then we get a bit of a creepy story that comes out of this. So him and his two daughters are living in a cave. So they're not living in a place that they've built. They're living in a place that they found. And for them, they're probably thinking, we're it. This is like back to the flood time period, except we don't have really much of a family to go on because Noah and his wife had their three sons and their three sons had their wives. So after the flood, Noah's like, hey, you guys need to go, you and your wives need to go and build the families back up, let's replenish the earth with people. So in their situation, these two young ladies are going, hey, it's just us and our dad. If our dad's the only male, basically, that's around to get us pregnant, then we need to get our dad to basically get us pregnant. And so to do that, they got him drunk. We don't know if they approached him with a story and he's like, heck no, I'm not doing that. And so they're like, well, we're going to get him drunk and do it anyways. I don't know. I don't know if there was more to the story or not. But they get him drunk. They sleep with their dad. They get pregnant. And that is where Edom and Ammon come from. So these are distant cousins to the Israelites. If you look at the Ammonites and the Edomites, when you get into Judges and Kings and Chronicles and stuff, they didn't get along with the Israelites, even though they were distant cousins. But some scholars say that story probably never really happened with Lot and his daughters, but it's a way to justify and understand where those people, those tribes tie into the narrative. But that's the story we have in the Bible, basically. So Hagar comes into this as well. She is the servant of Sarah. Now, Abraham and Sarah are getting up there in age, well up into their 90s, and Abraham has been given a promise that through him will come millions and millions of people. His progeny will turn into mighty nations, lots and lots of people, and bless the whole world. So he's like, okay, this is cool. I've got a wife. We're definitely really, really old. We're kind of getting the age where I don't think it's possible, but God said so we'll keep trying. And nothing's happening. And so Sarah comes to Abraham and says, look, this isn't working. Apparently I can't have kids, but I have a female servant. And so she can have kids that I will claim as my own. So this is how this worked, okay? As a female servant, Hagar was pretty at the bottom as far as the status of women. Okay, so when we think of marriage, we're thinking status, okay, because women were property in the Old Testament. So the status is what it helps us to understand what's going on in the story, okay? So her status is she is owned by Sarah. So Sarah controls Hagar. Hagar is property of Sarah. So Sarah basically says, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to basically farm out my servant's womb to have a baby for my husband, and I'm going to claim it for me. She's going to give birth to my child. basically. So this is the challenge of just this is the culture. This is how it worked back then. Okay, I'm not trying to say it's a good way to do it. Just saying this is how they did things back then. So that's Hagar's status. She doesn't control her own body. Sarah does, and Sarah's going to farm her body out so that her husband has progeny. Well, then Abraham says, okay, and so he goes along with it. Hagar gets pregnant. Now, and in this, it says in the scriptures that she gave Hagar to wife for Abraham. So what that means is Abraham now owns Hagar. So in status, Hagar and Sarah are equal in status. They're both owned by the same man. They become more equal. So Hagar has now gone up in status, okay, to be equal with Sarah. Hagar gets pregnant. And that doesn't sit well with Sarah, because now Hagar's the one with the progeny and Sarah is not. So in a way, Hagar has a little bit higher status in Sarah's eyes because of this. And so Sarah gets a little offended at this and decides, I don't like this. I don't like this exchange. Get rid of her. And so she basically abuses Sarah physically, like probably is yelling and shouting and hitting her and things. Hagar flees. Hagar heads to the land of Shur. So what a lot of scholars believe, she's heading back to Egypt. She's outside the city walls towards Egypt, basically a little town, little outpost town just outside of Egypt. And there's a spring there. And so she is getting water at this spring, and an angel of the Lord appears to her and talks with her. Now here's something that's interesting. All the blessings that were given to Abraham that helped Sarah, the angel came to Abraham and not Sarah. So Abraham told then Sarah about the blessings. Okay, but an angel came directly to Hagar and said, hey, you need to go back and you need to respect the wishes of Sarah. Sarah is your owner to an extent. She's your mistress that you're serving. So she's your employer, so go back and obey her. So a lot of people point to that as one of the earliest opportunities of God to justify slavery. And I think it's not a justification of slavery, as I think it is, he is honoring, he's just helping people to deal with the culture of their time. Okay, he's not telling Hagar, go, don't go back. Slavery's bad. Don't do that. You go on your own. I'll take care of you. That's not what he said. He said, go back and work with them. So she goes back to submit herself to Sarah, and things are okay for a little bit, but then later it has problems. So there's another blessing given to Abraham, and Abraham says, hey, no, actually it's through Sarah. Sarah will have a baby, and that's where the promised blessings will come. And Hagar's like, well, what about my son? And so she gets a blessing. Yes, your son is going to be, he's going to be the ruler, or his descendants will be develop into many nations. 12 princes, I think is what it is, which is interesting because Jacob has 12 sons of Israel, remember, and Ishmael has 12 sons that become princes. So some interesting correlation between Ishmael and Jacob that we get. The name Ishmael is God has heard me. And so we hear that later on when she gets that blessing. Because even Abraham, when God is giving Abraham this blessing of you're going to have this progeny, God's going, well, what about my son Abraham? And he says, no, not Abraham. You're not getting this through Abraham. It's through Isaac. Sarah's going to get pregnant and you're going to call him Isaac. I will bless Ishmael as well and take care of him. So Isaac comes on the scene. Now we've got Ishmael and Isaac. Abraham's got two boys to deal with. Sarah doesn't like how Ishmael and Isaac are playing with each other, and Sarah goes to Abraham and says, you need to kick her out. Now, if you notice, Sarah doesn't kick Hagar out on her own. She has to get permission from Abraham because she gave Hagar to Abraham as property. So Abraham owns Hagar, not Sarah. So she has to get permission from Abraham to do anything to Hagar. And so Abraham says, do what you want with her. So Sarah says, let's kick you out and get you out of here. So Abraham escorts her out, but on the way out gives her a loaf of bread and a canteen of water, and which isn't much. And it's interesting that we talked about this in class, that I wondered if Sarah was like, kick him out, don't give him nothing. And Abraham's like, no, we need to help him out. So this was kind of like, okay, I'll walk him out. I'll escort him out to make sure they're gone. And then he just kind of sneaks, here's some water and bread for you. And Hagar later wanders through the desert, decides, hey, I gotta abandon my kid to save myself because I can't take care of him and me. We're both starving. And an angel of the Lord again intervenes and says, no, you'll be fine. Okay, and go over here. And there's a well. And so she goes over and finds this well and is living and thriving. And that's where in the tradition, it's where a lot of the Arabic nations and Arabic people are coming from, is through Ishmael. That's why Islam is a Abrahamic religion, because through Ishmael, they get their connection to Abraham, basically. Whereas Jews and Christians get it through Jacob, basically. Jews specifically through Judah, but then Christians kind of vicariously attach themselves to them as children of Israel and go through Jacob also up to Abraham for the covenant. So that's why Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are Abrahamic religions. They all come back to a similar origination point in their religions. So an interesting story to think about. And I hope you probably have changed some of your thoughts. Most of the time when we think of Abraham and Sarah, we kind of hold them in high regard, and this is common in scriptures. The beauty of this story is we start to learn they're just human. God does miracles through imperfect humans. And that, I think, is an important lesson for us in that story. So next week, I'm starting my research into Hagar. I've got so much reading to do. It's crazy. So next week is spring break. So I'm going to focus on getting a leg up on that research and getting a lot of that reading done next week. So I'll have a lot more to talk about with Hagar and her story next week. So in my last class I know the video's getting a little long, sorry, fun stuff to learn. In my last class, we're starting to get into mediation, like techniques. So a goal of mediation, there's several stages of mediation if you're mediating with other people. A goal is to the goal of mediation is to help these people who are in an argument or have a dispute to see each other as humans, to recognize, oh, you're just another human. You're not that different from me. We just have differences of opinions or ideas. But when we can see each other more as equal, then we're more willing to accept what the other person is thinking. We don't have to agree with them, but we have to understand that they have a valid point. It's okay for them to think the way they think and me to think the way I think. So that's the goal of mediation. Once people can start to humanize each other, they'll come to a solution. It'll start to naturally happen. They'll figure it out. So pre-mediation is a very important thing. We did that last week in talking about asking these people questions, understanding their backgrounds and what's motivating them and why is that important and those kinds of things. This week, this lesson that we did that on Tuesday, the pre-mediation. That's super important, to do pre-mediation, to do that kind of work to get everything ready to go. You can start setting expectations. And if you think about it, if they're willing to meet with you and discuss things, and after you've gone through getting to know them and understand them, build rapport with them, so you as a mediator can be seen as important in this process and effective, then you're already starting to shift paradigms to help them come together more. So like half your work is done in the pre-mediation. During the mediation, when you get them in the same room and start to share and discuss and collaborate, it's just solidifying in each other's minds, oh, the other person is a human too. Has needs, has wants, has challenges, has fears, has concerns, all those things. And to come together on that. So that's what mediation is about. For this, I got the chance to participate this week in the mediation. My professor, Dr. Ford, emailed me on Tuesday, like 2 hours before class, and was like, hey, my volunteer that was going to help me do the mediation can't. Will you do it with me? Okay. So what the mediation was we did this week was I portrayed a Jewish person here in America who is very in touch with his family, his heritage, has even family that experienced the Holocaust, and is very strongly in favor of a military action in Gaza. Dr. Ford, Chad, he represented the other person in the argument, who was a Christian person who believed in Palestinian rights and believed in nonviolent resolutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The scenario was we both showed up at a interfaith club meeting. They showed a video talking about solutions and ideas to deal with the conflict over there. And I ended up calling him after the meeting, and we got into an argument on the phone, and that's where the dispute came from. So the class people, all the rest of the fellow students in class, spent Tuesday asking us individual questions. He broke the class into 2 groups. We had 15 minutes inside each group to let them ask us questions about us and our beliefs and ideas and what our values are and things, kind of doing the pre-mediation stuff. On Thursday, we met with the 2 of us in the front of the room, and then everybody could come down one at a time for 3 minutes and ask us questions to start doing the mediation of thinking through and helping us understand each other's perspectives and those things. We weren't supposed to get to a conclusion at that point, but we wanted to learn about asking questions and working with the dynamics of us in the same room together talking. So that's what we did. It was really fun. It was pretty wild to be on the hot seat and be a role player in this. You just kind of make it up as you go, but it was fun to work with Dr. Ford and kind of go back and forth on the issues and talk about things. It was a fun experience. I was super, super nervous to do it, but it worked out really well. So it was a good class. So mediation is fun. We're going to do a lot more of that the rest of the semester. So it's going to be good experiences. So if you have questions or thoughts about anything I've talked about today, feel free to put that in the comments below. Love to hear from you, what you think about these things. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you next week as we talk more about Hagar.